We begin this hour with breaking news out of Georgia. Portions of a grand jury report. They've just been released, giving us new insight into an investigation into former President Donald Trump.
Members of that grand jury were looking into the former president and his allies' alleged efforts to interfere with the 2020 presidential election results. You may recall the former president's phone call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in early 2021, asking him to find additional ballots.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Now, despite Trump's efforts there to find votes by claiming the election was fraudulent, the grand jury today said otherwise, saying, quote, "We find by a unanimous vote that no widespread fraud took place in the Georgia 2020 presidential election that could result in overturning that election."
Additionally, today's release includes just a portion of the grand jury's findings, including a section where jurors voiced concerns over some witnesses potentially lying under oath during the investigation. We want to bring in now Robert Costa, Graham Kates, and Jessica Levinson. Bob is CBS News' chief elections and campaign correspondent. Graham is a CBS News reporter, and Jessica is a CBS News legal contributor. Robert, we're going to start with you. Tell us, why did the grand jury only release the introduction and conclusion to this report?
Well, it's important to understand that we are getting partial information about this special grand jury report today because of a judge's order. The investigation here in Fulton County, Georgia, continues about former President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The district attorney, Fani Willis, is still to be determined on whether she will move forward with a regular grand jury that could issue indictments of the former president or some of his allies. What we're seeing today is a glimpse into an ongoing investigation with these snippets of a grand jury, special grand jury report. And we're learning that they do believe some crimes may have taken place when it comes to perjury, lying by witnesses.
And Graham, let me throw this at you, because we've kind of taken the text of what has been released and what we're finding, but what does this all mean to the larger case?
At the very least, we know that there's 7 other sections remaining, and this one section we saw, which was very brief, they recommended charges. That means that there could be recommendations for or against charging in each of those other sections. And so at the very least now we have some sort of sense of what the outline of this report is, although it was a very, very small glimpse.
I want to bring Jessica into this conversation. Jessica, the charges that we're talking about are for perjury. We understand that the former president was not in front of this grand jury. What does all of this then mean for former President Trump legally?
Great question. So when it comes to the perjury charges, probably nothing, for the reason that you indicate. I think there are 2 big takeaways here. One is that the special grand jury said, we think that there's perjury here. The other is that they concluded unanimously that there was no fraud in the 2020 presidential election. Now, what it means moving forward is that we just don't have, frankly, that part, that juicy part that we want, which is, what about recommendations for other people other than perjury? What about election fraud? What about making false statements to government officials? What about abuse of power? What about conspiracy? What about racketeering? All of these issues where we frankly knew we weren't going to find anything out. And so we know, honestly, not that much more than we did when the reporting was that the judge said, you know what, I'll release the introduction, the conclusion, and there's an indication that the special grand jury thinks that people who testified engaged in perjury.
And I guess for you, Bob, one thing that is clear from this grand jury's statement is that there is no validity to the idea that there was fraud in the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. What does that do then to President Trump's ambitions to return to the White House in 2024? We also had many Republican judges throughout the country appointed by Trump who did not substantiate those fraudulent claims as well.
So much of former President Trump's ongoing 2024 presidential campaign is fueled by what some of his allies have described as his grievance, as his vengeance, his attempt to have vengeance over the 2020 election. That's how his former campaign manager, Brad Parscale, described it privately a few years ago about why he would run. And now you're seeing, though, that grievance, that anger over 2020 is not based in reality or fact, based on this grand jury's conclusion here in Fulton County, Georgia. A special grand jury has concluded there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election in Georgia after listening to so many witnesses, 75 of them at least, under oath, and you can't lie to a special grand jury, and that was their conclusion. So that means when it comes to the legal aspect of looking back on the 2020 election, no widespread fraud took place. Special grand jury has underscored that with their partial report today. And for Trump, that presents yet another vexing issue for him as he continues to move forward politically. Will he continue to falsely claim the 2020 election was stolen or not? His allies say he likely will, but the facts continue to go against that claim.
Yeah. So, Graham, as we've heard, there's still a lot that we don't know. Those big things about other charges still sealed. But we did hear the grand jury say there should be some perjury charges pursued. Who might some of those names be that testify in front of this grand jury that might be looking at criminal perjury?
We haven't seen any of the testimony from the grand jury, and we only know a fraction of the people who testified. There were 75 of them, but there were some big names that kind of came out publicly, whether it was to challenge their subpoenas or just to acknowledge that they were testifying, and those included Senator Lindsey Graham and former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. And again, we have no idea what they said in their hearings, but those are some of the bigger names that we know of who were called to testify before this special purpose grand jury.
Is it possible that we may have that information unsealed, that we might get some more information about who those perjury charges might be targeted at?
The way the judge structured this is the rest of the report isn't supposed to come out until charges are filed. So there's no indication really when we're going to learn any of the rest of that. It's really in the district attorney's hands at this point.
And so, Jessica, just show us the big picture here. Have you ever seen a situation like this where the grand jury's decisions are being released? I know that for this judge, there was a determination made that this is in the public interest. They also said a decision was imminent. And Graham was telling us earlier, a journalist got to the judge earlier this week, they clarified legally imminent, not journalistically imminent. But have you ever seen something like this before?
No, thank goodness, in the sense that we don't want this to be normal. Now, we certainly have seen, let's be clear, situations where a judge says, you know what, there's something here within the public interest where normally we would keep this private under seal, but this involves public officials or an issue of public discussion. And therefore, we need to release the portions we can without violating people's due process, without interfering with an ongoing criminal investigation. So that is typical. Judges will release portions of reports all the time. What, of course, is not typical is the specifics of what this report is about, which is a president of the United States who's losing an election, calling a secretary of state from Georgia and saying, find me votes, and that kicking off a investigation into election fraud. And then that investigation broadening out into other things, like whether or not there were fake electors that the former president wanted to send to the Electoral College. So that we've not seen. That is not normal. But to underscore what's been said, what's next? At this point, we're not going to see more of the special grand jury's report. The judge has said, basically, you get what you get at this point, and we're waiting until the district attorney decides to charge or not charge in order to move forward. The district attorney, as you underscored, legally imminent is maybe different from how we use it in common parlance. So I suspect that there will be perjury charges. And frankly, I think maybe more likely than not, some other charges as well. I thought for a while, this is where the former president faced the most potential legal exposure, but we're going to have to wait a little bit on that.
Yeah, the big picture that is nothing less than our system of democracy.
That's right.
That's at stake. All right, Robert Costa, Jessica Levinson, Graham Kates, thank you all.